There's a story of a retirement home that was in a small town. Behind the retirement home, there was an alley, and in the alley was a bunch of old metal garbage cans. And almost every evening, a group of teenagers would gather in the alley, and they would take sticks and they would bang them against the side of the garbage cans. And it would create quite a racket, and it would upset many of the residents whose apartments backed onto the alley. The residents complained to the manager, and the manager went out and talked to the teens, but didn't get very far. So he called the police, and the police said, well, there's nothing we can do. The alley's not on your property, and they're really not breaking the law. It was a real nuisance. Well, finally, Mr. Smith, one of the elders in the home, said that he would see what he could do. Next day, he went outside, and he went over to where the kids were, and he says, you know, I love the fact that you're out here hitting these garbage cans. He said, it takes me back to when I was your age. I used to do the same thing. He said, I'll tell you what, I like it so much. Will you come back tomorrow night at 7 o'clock and for an hour just hit those garbage cans as hard as you can, and in return, I'll give each you $20. Kids are like, well, that's amazing. So the next night, they arrive at 7 o'clock, and sure enough, they start banging the cans as loud as they possibly can. And the residents in their home are saying to Mr. Smith, what on earth are you doing? This is crazy. It's worse than ever. He said, be patient. At 8 o'clock, he goes outside, and he says to the teens, that was great. That was nice and loud, really wonderful. He says, here you go. And he gives them each $20 bill. He says, well, I enjoyed it so much. Will you come and do it again tomorrow night? He says, the only thing is it's kind of expensive to give you $20 each time. He said, would you do it for $10? Kids are like, sure, of course. That's still a good deal. So the next night, 7 o'clock, they show up, and they start banging away on the side of the cans, and all the residents inside have their hands over their ears. And finally, 8 o'clock comes. Mr. Smith goes outside, and he goes, that was great. People inside, they're just loving it. He says, here you go. He said, $10 each. He gives them each $10. He says, will you come back and do it tomorrow? He says, the only thing is, even $10 is a little expensive. Would you do it for $5? Kids are like, well, that's not a lot of money, but I guess it's better than nothing. Sure enough, the kids next night show up at 7 o'clock, and they kind of half-heartedly start banging away on the garbage cans. And 8 o'clock comes around, Mr. Smith goes outside. He says, thanks, guys. That was great. Here's your $5. He said, I'd love to have you come tomorrow, but he says, I got to be honest with you. I'm on a pension. I don't have a lot of money. I really can't pay you to do it anymore, but could you continue to do it? And you know where this is headed. The leader of the group of kids turns to him and says, man, if you think we're going to do this for free, you got another thing coming to you. And they never again went outside and banged on the garbage cans. That's a story of wisdom. And that man is a wise man. And that's what wisdom is. It is the creative use of knowledge. And if you like that story, I think you're going to enjoy the next few weeks, because I want to do a whole series of messages on the topic of wisdom. Now, I'm not a particularly wise person, so I couldn't come up with a better title than simply wisdom, so that's what we're calling it. Each week I want to look at a different quality of what makes for a wise person. For example, wise people seek humility and embrace wonder. That will be a topic. Wise people value character over reputation. Wise people learn from the past, but they don't live there. And so on. 5 messages on the topic of wisdom. And the basis of this series is going to be the book of Proverbs in the Bible, which is the biblical book of wisdom. And I'm sure you all know what a proverb is. It's a short, pithy saying, such as a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, or a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Or my favorite, this is an African proverb. If your enemy wrongs you, buy his child a drum. Wise sayings. And that's what the book of Proverbs is. Written, it is believed, by King Solomon somewhere around the year of 700 BC. It is a biblical book filled with short, pithy sayings meant to share his unique wisdom on life and faith. So if you appreciate the quality of wisdom, hang in there with me for the next few weeks as we explore this topic. Before we get to the topic for today, I think we need to begin by asking, what is wisdom? Well, to me, wisdom is one of those qualities that is better embodied than it is explained, like with the story of the man. And what I mean by that is, even if you can't define wisdom, we can all point to somebody and say, that is a wise person. So let me begin by asking you, who is the wisest person that you know? Was it a parent or a grandparent who always had that piece of advice when you needed it? Was it a teacher or a preacher who helped you see life in a new way? Was it a child? So often we associate wisdom with age, but I think one of the gifts of wisdom is the ability to see things in a fresh way, unencumbered by bias or expectation. And kids do that better than anyone else. Who's the wisest person you know? Was it a counselor or a therapist who guided you through a difficult time in your life? Or maybe someone famous or well-known, an author perhaps who always seemed to be writing just for your eyes and ears, someone who always seemed to be able to say just what you needed to hear. Now, the reality is we can learn wisdom from all kinds of people and from all kinds of situations. Remember the old Aesop's tale? Now, he was a wise person. A lion, a fox, and a donkey became partners and successfully acquired a large amount of food. The lion asked the donkey to divide the prize. Carefully, the donkey divided the spoils into 3 equal shares. The lion was offended, burst into a rage, and devoured the donkey. Then the lion asked the fox to make a division. The fox accumulated all that they had killed into one large heap, put it in front of the lion, and kept one small morsel for himself. The lion said, "This is perfect. Who taught you how to divide so well?" And the fox replied, "I just recently learned it from the donkey." Wisdom in life comes to us in so many ways and from so many different people. Did you know that Socrates, as a young man, went on a quest to find a wise person? He spoke to literally dozens of people, from scholars to leaders to teachers, from royalty to peasants. Do you know what he concluded? And this is something to ponder. He said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing." That was the conclusion of Socrates. The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. Wow. So if you know nothing, you're going to enjoy this series. So let's get into it. Let's start off with a nice, easy one to ease us back into these services. The first quality of a wise person. A wise person lives from their heart. Proverbs 14:30 says this, "A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot." But it's Proverbs 4:23 that I want to focus on. It says this, "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the spring of life." In other words, live from your heart. Now, if I told you that, to live from your heart, you of course would know that I'm only speaking figuratively. Because in reality, nobody lives from their heart. We all live in our minds. Our minds are where we process thoughts and translate them into actions and make decisions. The mind is where we experience all our emotions, from love to fear to everything in between. The heart is simply a pump, keeping blood flowing through our bodies so that we can walk our dogs and buy our food and drive our cars. Your heart has no more emotion in it than your fingernail. So why do we associate emotions, particularly love, with the heart? Most believe it's because when we feel things deeply, be it love or fear, the brain releases chemicals into our bloodstream which causes our hearts to pump blood faster, and thus we feel it in our chest. That's why when someone says, "I love you," or someone says, "I'm leaving you," we understand it in our minds and we process it in our minds, but we feel it in our chest as our hearts react to the flood of adrenaline. That feeling of being heartbroken is simply the chemical reaction that occurs when our hearts are flooded with an abundance of hormones. It didn't take much, therefore, to figuratively move the locus of emotion from the mind to the heart. Most believe it was the ancient and wise philosopher Plato, who was the first to associate emotion with the heart. And the ancient Greeks then took it and ran with it, writing some of the first poetry about the longing of the heart to be loved. And just as an aside, do you know where the image of the heart comes from that we use today to describe or to symbolize love? You know, the one with the two big loops and the point at the bottom that looks absolutely nothing like a human heart? Well, I'm going to put a picture up on the screen. It's over there or it's over there. This picture is from a manuscript written in 1344. It's called The Romance of Alexander. And in the manuscript there is this picture of a woman receiving a heart while a man across from her, obviously her suitor, we assume it's Alexander, is holding his chest, and the assumption being made that he has taken his heart from his chest to give it to her as a sign of his love for her. And the shape of the heart, if you look closely, is what we would symbolize today as the heart. The very first time it was symbolized in that way. Let's go back to the proverb. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the spring of life. Its words have almost a poetic flow, don't they? On the one hand, it seems to suggest that we must guard our hearts or protect our hearts, that perhaps we must not be too quick to just hand them over to anyone or let anyone into our hearts. Keep your heart with all vigilance. You know, we've all heard the term for the opposite of that, to wear your heart on your sleeve. We all know someone like that, who just puts it all out there, goes all in with matters of the heart. Or maybe you're someone like that. You just love with abandon. Is that an admirable quality? In many ways it is. In fact, it's a beautiful quality. There's something very attractive about the person who trusts openly, who shares his or her emotions, someone who eagerly wants to let people into their lives and share the depths of themselves with others. An article in a magazine I was reading this month caught my attention. It said, "People who wear their hearts on their sleeve are my favorite kind of people." The article went on to characterize who those people are. It says they are people who mean what they say. They are people who would rather be honest and sound foolish than be deceitful and sound clever. They are people who aren't interested in playing games with others. They are the ones who make you feel comfortable and safe. They are the ones who hug you a little tighter, give you one more kiss, make time for you when you need them. They're the ones who remember birthdays and anniversaries and special events. Do you have someone in your life like that? Someone who wears their heart on their sleeve? I hope you do, because we all need people like that in our lives. People who put their hearts out there for others. They make us feel better about ourselves. They make us feel better about our place in the world. But we also know that loving that way comes at a cost. I think about it this way. If you were to leave a $20 bill on the front seat of your car and leave your car open, that $20 bill could sit there for days, even weeks. But eventually you know someone's going to come along who's going to take advantage of that situation and take that $20 bill. And so it is with the heart. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we lived in a world where we could all wear our hearts on our sleeves? Feel no fear of the heart being broken or of trust being misplaced. Much like a child does with such abandon, wanting only to give and to receive affection. But we know that there's a risk in putting ourselves out there. You know, it's interesting because the proverb says, keep your heart with all vigilance. In the King James Version, it says, guard your heart with all vigilance. But if you go back to the original Hebrew, literally translated, what it says is, put a watchman over your heart. What does a watchman do? I think of a night watchman at a building site, for example. A watchman is just that person who watches who comes and goes, who monitors what's going on around them, who makes sure everything is safe and at peace. I think this proverb is gently trying to remind us that although we are called to live generously and with an open heart, sometimes there's wisdom in keeping watch over them. Sometimes being a little cautious, a little discerning, even a little protective. You know, it's really funny how the universe works. Because as I was writing this sermon this week, I was watching the news on my computer, and lo and behold, the first serious girlfriend that I ever had, the first person I ever gave my heart to, appeared on my TV screen, or on my computer screen, just out of nowhere. It turns out that she is a reporter in Ottawa for the CBC. I couldn't believe it, and I nearly fell off my chair. I have had no contact with this person for over 30 years. We met in grade 13, then we went to Carleton University together. She was in journalism, and I was in political science. Everything was great for about a month and a half. And then Thanksgiving came, and she dumped me like a sack of potatoes. Yeah, you can say, "Oh, Phil." But it hurt. And I remember thinking after that, I'm never going to give my heart to anybody else again. Well, that lasted for about 3 months. But we do, don't we? We have to find that balance between wearing our hearts on our sleeve and keeping watch over them. Why? Because the proverb reminds us that from our hearts flow the spring of life. That's a poetic way of saying that our hearts, figuratively, are the source of all that is good and important and valuable in life. It's the place where we feel. And when we feel, we know that we're alive. When we feel, we're motivated to act. And when we feel, we want to invest ourselves deeper into life and deeper into one another. When I think of what it means to live from the heart, I don't think it means that we are called to live recklessly, with abandon, with no thought of who may take advantage of our hearts or wearing our hearts on our sleeve. But rather it's a commitment every day to fully engage with life, to allow ourselves not just to think and to consider and to make choices, but to feel things, and to allow ourselves to feel, for that is when we know that we are truly alive. If I asked you to share with me the best memories of your life, you're not going to tell me it was when you got 100% on a math test one day. You're going to share with me the story of when your child was born or when you said, "I do" to someone you love. Why? Because you felt those things. If I were to ask you to share your greatest achievement, you're not going to say when you fixed the tap in the bathroom. You're going to say when I completed that 10-kilometer run or when I climbed that mountain, because you felt those things. If I were to ask you what makes a great church, you aren't going to say stimulating theology. Maybe some of you are, but more likely you're going to say a place where I feel connected and cared for. That's the spring of life. This is where God is calling us to live. Brené Brown, who is an author and public speaker, and I know many are familiar with her work, she wrote an entire book on this topic called Wholehearted Living. And I think she nailed it with this quote. Wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done or how much is left undone, I am enough. Those are wise words from a wise woman. And wasn't that really what Jesus was saying when he was asked, what is life all about? And how did he respond? Love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Wholehearted living. And that also means learning, therefore, to listen to the heart, to listen to its own unique voice and its own rhythm, and trusting that it has something to tell us. As I said at the beginning of the service, I did a wonderful wedding this week for Darlene and Aaron. And I'm going to embarrass them for a moment because I know that they're watching today. I wish everyone could have been there, and I know they wish everyone could have been there. But sadly, COVID got the last word on that. It was a beautiful wedding right down at the dock on their home on Bass Lake. It was touch and go for a while if we could even have it outside because the weather was threatening, but the sun came out when it needed to come out. And because of COVID, numbers were limited. And yet people found a way to be there. Some gathered just off the shore in boats or paddle boards. Neighbors came out and stood on their lawn. I mean, everyone loves a wedding. It was a magnificent setting. Anyway, in the short message that I gave before they exchanged their vows, I shared a reading that I recently came across about trusting in the heart and trusting love. And I'd like to share the words with you. I don't know who wrote them, but I think they are wise and I think they are profound. It's called Follow the Pull. Follow the pull of your heart and avoid, if you can, the need to push away that which resists. How can you tell when something is designed and destined to be? You feel an internal pull, an excitement, a motivation that inspires you to follow the pull effortlessly with curiosity. When you are forcing yourself down a path that isn't meant for you, it is draining, time-consuming, and often ends in heartache and disappointment. Listen to the hesitation you hear in your heart. It is trying to guide you home. We do this in relationships, friendships, businesses, careers, in many aspects of our lives. Sometimes our minds tell us we need to push against the grain to gain control. But what isn't meant to be, isn't meant to be. But when it is meant to be, you will know, and it will be effortless. So wade into the ocean, be taken by the waves, and quiet the urge to swim against the current. It's much easier to allow what's meant to be than to try to control what isn't. Follow the pull of your heart, for it contains your truth. Friends, that's really just another way of capturing what that proverb says. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the spring of life. Live from the heart. Don't just think about life here. Feel it here. And let its wisdom and its truth carry you forward. Amen.